Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. I always remind myself of this brief introduction before I begin. It's a small routine, but somehow it provides a sense of grounding. It's a way to bring order to the chaos of my thoughts. But today, I find myself struggling to find where to begin. So much is on my mind, so much to unpack, and yet I feel overwhelmed by it all. It feels as though the weight of everything might just spill over. But there's something important I need to share with you. A moment, an experience that shifted everything. You may find it hard to believe, but I promise you it's real. It all began with a knock on my door. I've lived in this small, familiar neighborhood for years, decades actually. It's the kind of place where everyone knows each other, where the smallest acts of kindness are exchanged with ease. The kind of place where you can count on your neighbors for a warm smile, a brief chat, or maybe a cup of sugar when you run out. I'm the sort of person who doesn't like to impose, especially not on people I don't know well. But sometimes, life has a way of shaking us up in unexpected ways. This time, the shakeup came in the form of my neighbor, Ben. Now, Ben is the type of person you might not expect to have a profound impact on your life. He's a man of few words, of quiet demeanor, not unlike many of us who prefer to stay in the background. We've lived next door to each other for years. And while we've exchanged polite greetings, we've never truly shared much beyond the usual pleasantries. But that day, something was different. That day, I was struggling more than I had in a long time. I was grappling with health issues, not the kind of things people talk about often, but enough to make me feel fragile, to make me question everything I thought I knew about myself. It's a curious thing getting older. You reach a point where you think you have it all figured out, only to find that your body betrays you in ways you never could have imagined. I hadn't been out much lately. Fatigue had a way of sinking deep into my bones, and the aches in my joints were becoming unbearable. I remember sitting by the window, gazing out at the garden, wondering if I'd ever feel like myself again. It wasn't just the physical exhaustion, it was the mental strain that followed. I hadn't realized how much I'd been pulling away from everything, from friends, from family, from the world around me. And then it happened. The knock at the door. I hadn't been expecting anyone, so I hesitated. But then came the knock again, louder this time. I stood up, a little dazed, and opened the door. And there stood Ben. His usual quiet nature was softened by a small, genuine smile. He held a bag in his hand, and his eyes, those deep, knowing eyes, seemed to look right through me, as if seeing more than just the surface of who I was. "Hey, Martha," he said, calling me by name for the first time. "I thought I'd bring you something." I was taken aback, not because I had expected no one to notice, but because for the first time in so long, someone did. Someone had noticed, and someone cared. Without even realizing it, I had been yearning for that simple recognition. Someone seeing me, truly seeing me, in the midst of my isolation. "What's this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though my heart was already a little too full. Ben handed me the bag. "Just some things to help. I've been making a batch of soup for myself, but I thought you might need some too. It's nothing fancy, just homemade chicken broth, a little salt, and some vegetables." I thought it might help with the recovery. I blinked, surprised by the gesture. It was just soup, something so simple, but in that moment, it meant more than I could have imagined. I hadn't been cooking much lately. The fatigue made even preparing food feel like an insurmountable task, and most days, I couldn't even bring myself to think about food at all. "Thank you, Ben," I said, my voice a little unsteady. I didn't know what else to say. He nodded, still smiling, but now there was a quiet seriousness in his expression. "You've been a little quiet lately," he said. "If you ever need anything, someone to talk to, or even just a little company, don't hesitate to knock. We're neighbors after all." And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, holding the bag of soup. My heart was full, but I was overwhelmed by the emotions that swirled inside me. Gratitude, surprise, and even a bit of shame. How had I allowed myself to become so closed off, so isolated? I had family, I had friends, yet I had distanced myself from all of them. Ben's small, simple act of kindness made me realize just how far I had drifted from everything that truly mattered. It was a wake-up call, a gentle reminder that connection, even the smallest of gestures, can bring us back from the isolation we sometimes put ourselves in. I went inside, sat down at the table, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I held that bag of soup in my hands, not just as a gift, but as a symbol of something much deeper: the human need for connection, the power of kindness, and the strength it takes to let others in. And so, in that moment, I began to understand. It was not just the soup that had nourished me, but the realization that I wasn't alone, even when I thought I was. I wasn't sure what had warmed me more, the soup or the unexpected kindness. But in that moment, the world didn't feel quite as cold anymore. I couldn't stop thinking about what Ben had said, that he'd noticed me, even when I hadn't noticed myself. How often do we just go through life, so tangled in our own struggles, that we forget to truly see the people around us? In that moment, I realized how much I had been missing out on. It wasn't just about physical warmth, it was the kind of warmth that comes from human connection. I began to wonder, what if I started really seeing the world again? Not just seeing it with my eyes, but truly perceiving it with my heart. The days that followed found me reflecting on everything Ben had sparked in me. He had opened a door inside, one I hadn't even known was locked. And it wasn't just the soup, it was the act of being seen, of being cared for without expectation or judgment. It was as though, with one simple gesture, a small door had creaked open in my heart. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. But little did I know, this was only the beginning. Ben's unexpected act of kindness was the first thread in a much larger tapestry that would change both our lives in ways neither of us could have anticipated. After Ben's visit, things felt different. I wouldn't say I was instantly healed, far from it. The journey was still long, and I had much to face, but something within me had shifted. The heaviness in my chest felt a little lighter, and I began noticing the little things, the small moments I had been too tired or too distracted to see before. It wasn't just about the soup. It was about someone taking the time to care, about someone reaching out when they could have easily stayed quiet. The simple act of kindness made me realize how disconnected I had become from the world. I started thinking about the last few years of my life. How I had slipped into quiet spaces, retreating from the people around me, choosing to exist on the periphery. I had let myself fade into the background, and somewhere along the way, I had forgotten what it felt like to truly live, to truly engage. I began seeing Ben more, though nothing too dramatic at first. It was small, simple things, an occasional wave from across the yard, a quick chat about the weather, or a brief exchange while I took out the trash. But there was a quiet understanding between us now, an unspoken connection that grew stronger with each passing day. It was like a thread, delicate but strong, pulling us a little closer, bringing us back to a shared humanity. And then one evening, just a few days after Ben's visit with the soup, something unexpected happened. I was sitting in my favorite chair by the window, the warm golden light of the setting sun filling the room. I had been feeling physically better, at least the fatigue had eased, and the aches were less intense. But my mind was restless, filled with questions I didn't have the answers to. And then there came a knock at the door. This time I wasn't surprised. In fact, I almost expected it. There was something comforting about knowing someone cared enough to check in. In a world full of uncertainty, that simple act felt like a lifeline. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my worn-out sweater, and walked to the door. There, standing on the other side, was Ben once again, this time holding a small basket of fruit. His smile was casual, almost playful, as he spoke. "I thought you might like something fresh," he said softly. I picked up a few things from the market, apples, pears, and even a couple of peaches. I took the basket from him, once again overwhelmed by his thoughtfulness. "Thank you, Ben. You really don't have to keep bringing me things." He shrugged, a humble smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I know, but I want to. I don't mind. You've been kind of quiet lately." I figured you might need something to cheer you up. I nodded, but I didn't know what to say. His words, so simple, so sincere, offered a quiet comfort that made me feel less invisible, less alone. But as I stood there holding the basket of fruit, I noticed something change in Ben's expression. His eyes grew more serious and his posture shifted, as if something was weighing on him. Martha, he began, his voice quieter now. I don't mean to be nosy or anything, but are you okay? I mean, really? The question caught me off guard. For so long I had been hiding behind a facade of politeness, pretending everything was fine when deep down, I knew it wasn't. I hadn't realized just how much I had been avoiding the truth, both about my health and about myself. Ben was the first person in a long time to look me in the eye and really ask, if I was okay. I hesitated, unsure of how to respond. The truth felt too complicated, too messy to untangle all at once. So instead of answering immediately, I invited him in. Do you want to sit for a while? I'm making some tea, I offered. Ben nodded and stepped inside. And for a moment, we just sat there, two people in quiet companionship, sharing a simple, ordinary space. I filled the kettle and set it on the stove, the rhythmic motion grounding me in the moment. As the water heated, we chatted about lighter topics, the neighborhood news, the weather, our usual small talk. But even as we spoke about trivial things, I could feel the weight of Ben's question still hanging in the air, unspoken but undeniable. It lingered, waiting to be addressed. Finally, after a long silence, I spoke. I don't know, I said softly, my voice almost a whisper. The truth was more complicated than I could explain. But in that moment, I realized I didn't have to have all the answers. All I needed was to let someone in, to admit that I wasn't okay. And maybe, just maybe, that was the first step toward healing. I think I've been struggling more than I've admitted, even to myself. It's not just the physical stuff. It's the everything, the isolation, the feeling like I'm just fading into the background. I didn't realize how much I've been avoiding facing what's going on in my life. And it's hard to talk about. Ben didn't interrupt. He just sat there listening, his expression thoughtful. He didn't seem to be judging me, didn't seem uncomfortable with the silence. It was as though he was simply there to listen, to be present. That in itself felt like a gift. You don't have to go through this alone, Martha Ben said quietly, after a long pause. I know it's not easy. I can see that. But sometimes just talking even a little can make all the difference. You don't have to hide or pretend I'm here. His words, simple and honest, settled over me like a warm blanket. I hadn't realized how much I needed that reassurance, how much I needed to know that someone cared enough to say it out loud. There's something powerful about feeling seen, truly seen in a way that goes beyond the surface. Ben had done that for me. He had seen the parts of me I had been hiding even for myself, and he had offered understanding without expectation. The moment hung between us, filled with unspoken emotions. I didn't have the words to express everything I was feeling, but somehow I didn't need to. Ben's quiet presence spoke volumes. We didn't need to rush. We could just be in that moment without the pressure of expectations. And that's when I realized he wasn't just offering me help. He was offering me a chance to connect, to rediscover a part of myself I had buried for too long. Something in me stirred something I hadn't felt in a while, a sense of possibility. What started with a simple gesture of kindness was slowly becoming something deeper, something more meaningful. It wasn't just about Ben helping me with soup or fruit. It was about the way he had opened a door I hadn't even realized was closed. But as much as I had opened up to him, I still didn't know where this would go. What I did know was that something had changed inside me, and as it turns out, inside Ben too. And that change was only the beginning. The days following our last conversation were oddly calm, as if a delicate understanding had settled between Ben and me. We didn't talk about everything right away. In fact, we hardly talked about anything specific, but I could feel something was shifting. A subtle but undeniable change in the air between us. I found myself looking forward to our moments together more than I'd ever anticipated. I didn't know if it was because I was simply grateful for his kindness or if something more was beginning to take root. But every time I saw him, my heart beat just a little faster. It wasn't love, at least not yet, but it was something, a growing connection, a bond that felt both comforting and unsettling. There were times when I'd catch myself staring at him, wondering what was behind those kind eyes, those quiet, thoughtful gestures. Then one evening it happened. I had spent the day in my garden, tending to the flowers that had been wilting under the heat of the summer sun. It felt good to be outside again, the fresh air filling my lungs as I dug in dirt. Gardening had always been something I enjoyed, a small hobby I'd kept up for years, but as the sun began to set and I wiped the sweat from my brow, I felt a pull to check on Ben. It was an odd feeling when I hadn't felt before. I didn't need anything, not really, but the thought of him was there lingering in the back of my mind. I wiped my hands on a rag and headed over to his house, just a few steps down the street. When I knocked on his door, I wasn't sure what I was hoping for. It may be just a simple conversation, a friendly exchange like the ones we'd had before. But as soon as he opened the door, I could see something was different. His eyes were darker, his smile less certain. "Martha," he said, a hint of surprise in his voice. "Hey, what's up? I was just thinking about you," I said before I could stop myself feeling a little embarrassed by how it sounded. "I wanted to check on you, see how you're doing." Ben stepped back, inviting me in with a subtle gesture. "I'm fine, just working on some things around the house," he said, leading me to the living room. But there was a tension in his words, and edge to his too that I couldn't ignore. We sat down, and for a while we made small talk, talking about our neighbors, the weather, and the usual. But the air between us felt different now, more charged, like there was something unsaid, a question hanging just out of reach. Finally, after a long silence, Ben leaned forward and looked at me with those deep, searching eyes. "Martha," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something that's been on my mind for a while." My heart skipped a beat. The sudden shift in his demeanor caught me off guard. This wasn't the easygoing Ben I had grown used to. This was someone who had something serious to say. "I've been thinking about us, about the way things have been," he continued, his voice steady, but filled with a quiet intensity. "And I can't help but feel that there's something more between us. I know we've only known each other for a little while, but I don't want to ignore what's happening here. I think there's a connection between us that goes beyond just helping each other out." I sat there frozen for a moment. His words felt like a punch to the gut, but not in a bad way. It was like the truth was rushing to the surface, and suddenly everything that had been swirling around in my mind made sense. My heart was racing, my thoughts jumbled, unsure of where to go from here. Ben was laying it all out, and now I had to decide how to respond. "I never expected this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I wasn't looking for anything like this. I've been through so much, and well, I don't know if I'm ready to open up like that." Ben nodded, his expression softening. "I understand, Martha. I'm not asking for anything right now. I just wanted you to know how I feel. I don't want you to feel like this is just a passing thing. I care about you, Martha, more than I thought I would. And I think you might feel something too, even if you're not ready to admit it." His words hit me like a wave. I had known it deep down, but hearing him say it out loud made everything so real, so tangible. I didn't know what I felt, not exactly but I knew that something inside me had started to stir, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe it was just the simple fact of being seen, of being understood, or maybe it was something more, a connection that went beyond just the occasional visit or kind gesture. "I don't know what to say," I admitted, my voice trembling. "I never thought I'd be in this place with everything that's happened, but I care about you too, Ben, I do." There was a long pause. Ben didn't move, didn't say anything for a few moments, just letting my words sink in. And then slowly he reached out and took my hand, his fingers warm and steady in mine. "I'm not asking for anything in return," he said softly, "but I want you to know that I'm here. Whatever this turns into, I'm here. You don't have to go through it alone anymore. And in that moment, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was the beginning of something real, something deeper than I had imagined possible. For the first time in a long while, I felt hope. Ben's presence had unlocked a door inside me that I hadn't even known was closed. It wasn't just about his help. It was about the way he saw me, the way he made me feel alive again, like I mattered. As we sat there holding hands in the quiet of his living room, I realized that I was no longer alone, and more importantly, I didn't have to be afraid of what came next. The days following our conversation were filled with a quiet but unmistakable change. Ben and I spent more time together, not just helping each other with the usual tasks, but talking, sharing stories, and learning about one another. It felt like something new was unfolding, like a chapter I hadn't expected to write. Every time we met, I felt more connected to him, more comfortable in his presence. It wasn't just about his help anymore. It was about him, about what we were slowly building between us. We had our first real date, though it wasn't anything extravagant. It was a simple dinner at the small bistro down the road, the same place I'd always gone for a quiet meal. Ben had insisted on cooking for me, but I had pushed back, suggesting we step out for a change of scenery. He agreed without question, but I could see a certain satisfaction in his eyes, as if he were pleased by my choice. Sitting across from each other at the small table, there was a sense of ease between us, the kind that only comes when two people truly feel comfortable with one another. We didn't need words to fill the space. The laughter we shared, the gentle glances, and the unspoken understanding felt like enough. As the evening progressed, I couldn't help but think back to everything that had brought us here, how unexpected it all had been, how my life had been so completely turned upside down by a simple act of kindness. What I had once viewed as just a neighbor had slowly become someone who meant more to me than I could have imagined. After dinner, we took a walk, the cool evening air wrapping around us like a soft blanket. The city streets were quiet, the faint hum of traffic distant and soothing. We didn't talk much, just enjoyed each other's company, but something in the air felt different. There was a weight to it, a sense of possibility. "I'm glad we're doing this," Ben said, breaking the comfortable silence. His voice was soft, sincere. "I know we've only known each other for a short time, but I feel like we're building something real." I smiled, feeling my heart swell with emotion. It wasn't just the words, it was the way he said them. The truth in his tone. He wasn't just speaking to fill the silence. He meant it. "I feel the same way," I said, my voice a little quieter than usual. "I didn't expect any of this, but now that it's happening, I can't help but feel like it's exactly what I needed. I've been so caught up in my own fears and regrets, but you've shown me that there's more help there. But there's still time to find joy, to connect with people, to open up again." Ben stopped walking for a moment, turning to face me. His hand reached out gently, brushing a strand of hair from my face, his touch tender and reassuring. "Martha, you don't have to be afraid anymore. Whatever happens, we'll figure it out together. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." In that moment, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. It wasn't the grand love story I had once dreamed of in my youth, but it was real. It was honest. It was a partnership. A deep connection forged in the quiet moments that mattered most. The next few months passed in a blur of new experiences, more walks, more conversations, and more moments of shared understanding. Our bond continued to grow, strengthened by the trust we had built in each other. There were no grand declarations, no sweeping gestures, just a steady growing affection that felt as natural as breathing. I started to realize something important. Love isn't always about fireworks and grand romantic gestures. Sometimes it's about the small things, the way someone listens, the way they make you feel heard and understood, the way they show up for you when you need the most. Ben had done that for me in ways I never expected. His patience, his kindness, and his quiet strength had helped me heal in ways I never thought possible. One evening, as we sat together in the living room of his house, sipping our drinks and watching the sun set through the window, I knew without a doubt that this was where I was meant to be. There was no need for questions anymore, No more wondering if this was real. It was real. It was happening. I never thought I'd be here, I said softly, almost to myself. Ben smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. I know, neither did I, but sometimes life takes us where we least expect it, and we end up where we need to be. And in that moment, I realized that Ben's unexpected help had changed everything. It had given me a new perspective on life, a new appreciation for the quiet, steady connections that truly matter. I wasn't just healed because of him. I was healed because of the way we had learned to be there for each other, to support each other through the small moments and the big ones. As I looked at him sitting there beside me, I knew one thing for sure. Life wasn't about the grand moments. It was about the people who show up for you day after day and help you rediscover yourself. And in Ben, I had found that person. There was still much to figure out, but for the first time in years, I felt ready to take on whatever came next, knowing I wasn't alone anymore. And that, I realized, was all I ever really needed.